The diner on 5th Street. The coffee had gone lukewarm, but Ella didn't mind. She wrapped both hands around the mug anyway, more out of habit than need, and watched the morning light crawl across the checkered floor of her restaurant. Outside, 5th Street was just waking up. A delivery truck idled at the curb. Someone's dog barked twice and gave up. 25 years old today. It wasn't a number that felt like much of anything, and yet, sitting there in the quiet before opening, she found herself doing the thing people do on birthdays whether they mean to or not. Counting backward, tracing the line from wherever she was now to wherever she'd started, and where she'd started wasn't a good place. She was 6 when her mother died, 6 years old, and after that, it was just her and her father in a house that stopped feeling like a house and started feeling like something to survive. He was not a man who believed in second chances, or gentleness, or the idea that a child could make a mistake without paying for it. He believed she needed punishing, every day, whether she'd earned it or not. He kept his belt within reach the way other men keep their keys. Ella didn't like to think about those years in detail. She'd found, over time, that the mind is merciful in its own strange way. It lets you remember that something happened without making you relive exactly how. What she remembered instead was the feeling, the flinch that never fully left her shoulders, the habit of listening for footsteps, the way she used to count ceiling tiles at night because it was easier than counting anything else. By 16, she'd had enough of surviving quietly. She left in the middle of the night with a backpack and no plan beyond distance. 2 towns over, she found herself standing outside a small diner just before closing, hungry and out of options, and a woman named Sally was locking up the front door. Sally didn't ask many questions. That was the first kindness. She looked at Ella, 16, tired in a way 16 shouldn't be, and instead of turning her away, she handed her a plate of leftover meatloaf and said, "Eat first, talk later if you want to." Ella never fully explained herself, not in words. But Sally seemed to understand anyway, the way people who've lived a while sometimes do. She offered Ella the small room in the back of the diner, barely bigger than a closet, with a cot and a window that didn't quite close, and told her she could stay as long as she worked. So Ella worked. She scrubbed dishes until her knuckles cracked in the cold months. She learned to carry 4 plates up her arm before she could carry 2 properly. She memorized the regulars, how Mr. Abernathy liked his eggs, how the Tuesday morning crowd always tipped better than Fridays, how to smile at people even on days when smiling felt impossible. And somewhere in all of that, without either of them quite noticing when it happened, the diner became home. Sally became something close to family. It was the first time in Ella's life that a place felt safe simply because she was allowed to be there. 2 years passed like that. 2 years of early mornings and late closings, of learning the rhythm of a small business the way you learn the rhythm of a person you love. Sally never had children of her own. She used to joke that the diner was her only child, and then she'd look at Ella and say, "Well, maybe not my only one." 2 days before Ella's 18th birthday, Sally died in her sleep. It was sudden, and it was the kind of grief that doesn't announce itself politely. It just arrives and sits down and refuses to leave. Ella found her that morning when Sally didn't come down to start the coffee. For a long moment, she just stood in the doorway of Sally's little upstairs apartment, unable to make her legs carry her any closer. The funeral was small, a handful of regulars, the mailman, an old cook who used to work weekends. Ella stood at the back of it, 18 years old in 2 days, burying the only person who'd ever chosen her without conditions attached. What she didn't expect, what nearly knocked the breath out of her when the lawyer read it aloud, was that Sally had left her everything: the diner, the building, the small apartment above it. Everything Sally had built over 30 years of early mornings, handed to a girl she'd known for 2. "She talked about you like you were already hers," the lawyer said, folding the paperwork, closed. I think she'd been planning this for a while. Ella didn't feel like she deserved it. Grief has a way of making gifts feel like guilt, But she also understood, somewhere underneath the sorrow, that the greatest way to honor what Sally gave her was to keep the doors open. So she did. She kept the menu mostly the same, out of respect more than necessity. She kept Sally's photograph, on the wall by the register, a little crooked, exactly where Sally had hung it herself. And little by little, the diner that had saved her life became a place Ella was proud to call her own. 2 weeks after Sally's passing, during the thick of a Saturday lunch rush, plates clattering, the grill hissing, every booth full, the front door opened, and her father walked in. Ella hadn't seen him in almost 2 years. He looked older than she remembered, thinner in a way that read more like decline than discipline. But his voice hadn't changed. Neither had the way he used it. He didn't bother with hello. He told her he was broke, that he'd heard about Sally, that everything she now owned should rightfully belong to him. He was her father, after all, and family took care of family. He said it like it was owed to him, like the years of belts and bruises were simply the cost of doing business, and now the bill had come due in his favor. Ella said no. It was a small word, but it was the first time in her life she'd ever said it to him and meant it completely. His face changed the way it always used to change, right before things got bad. His hand went to his belt buckle, out of pure old habit, muscle memory built over a decade of using it as a threat before he'd even use it as a weapon. For a half second, Ella was 6 years old again. Then she was 16. Then she was standing, in her own restaurant, in front of her own customers. And she was not a child anymore. She didn't even have to say anything. Before she could move, before she could speak, 3 men from the corner booth, regulars, men who'd been coming in for coffee and pie for years, who'd watched her grow into this place the way you watch a plant finally take root, were already on their feet. They didn't ask questions either. They simply grabbed him, hauled him toward the door, and threw him out onto the sidewalk in front of God and the whole Saturday lunch crowd. One of them, an older man named Walt, who always ordered the same tuna melt, dusted off his hands like he'd just taken out the trash and sat back down to finish his coffee as if nothing had happened at all. Ella stood frozen for a moment, plate still in her hand, half the diner staring at her with a mixture of concern and something like protectiveness. Then, slowly, the lunch rush resumed. Forks against plates, conversation, life moving on the way it does. 4 days later, her phone rang. It was the hospital. Her father had been badly beaten during a robbery at his apartment. 3 masked men, the police report said, though nothing was ever taken that anyone could account for. No suspects, no arrests, no answers. Not then and not later. He was alive, but barely, and what recovery he managed over the following months was partial at best. He would never fully be the man he was again, though depending on how you looked at it, that might not have been the worst outcome. The hospital asked if Ella would come, if she'd help arrange his care, sign for his treatment, take him in once he was discharged. She said no to that too. It wasn't an easy no. She sat with it for a long time before she gave her answer, turning the decision over the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. But when she searched herself for guilt, she found only quiet. He was placed in a state-run nursing facility, the kind with fluorescent lighting and thin blankets, to live out whatever years remained. Ella never saw him again. She didn't spend much time wondering about the 3 masked men either. Some questions are better left where they land. What she did instead was build a life. She poured herself into the diner the way Sally once had. Early mornings, late closings, memorizing new regulars the same way she'd once memorized the old ones. She kept Sally's picture on the wall, a little crooked, always. She hired a girl a few years younger than herself, someone with tired eyes and a look Ella recognized instantly, and she gave her the same offer that had once saved her own life. A job, a room, no questions required unless she wanted to answer them. The little diner on 5th Street became something of a local story over the years, the kind of place people brought out-of-towners to, just to say you have to try this. Ella never advertised much. She didn't need to. Word travels on its own when a place is built out of something real. Now, on the morning of her 25th birthday, She sat in a booth of her own restaurant with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. And she let herself do something she rarely allowed. She let herself sit still with all of it. The bad years. The belt. The room above a diner that smelled like coffee and bacon grease and, somehow, safety. Sally's face on the wall. The 3 men from the corner booth who never once asked to be thanked. She thought about her father sometimes, in the same detached way you might think about weather in a city you no longer live in. Not with hatred anymore. Not really with anything at all. The bell above the front door jingled. Her first customer of the day stepped in, stomping the morning cold off his boots, calling out his usual order before he'd even sat down. Ella smiled, set down her coffee, and stood up to start the day. 25 years old, and finally, entirely, her own.